Welcome, everybody, to Before It Was Extreme, the legacy of the Tri-State Wrestling Alliance. I'm joined today by Jim Molyneux. Go ahead,
How you
Jim.
doing?
And Joel Goodhart.
Hey, all right. We wrestled, we brawled, we did it all.
Now, the story of this podcast is basically going to be exploring the TWA and what would eventually become ECW and everything that entailed. And to my knowledge, Joel, you've never even seen any of the ECW stuff.
I never saw one ECW match live, ever.
Wow. And Jim, you were there for pretty much all of it, if I'm not mistaken.
From day one to the day the door was closed.
And another guy who was there the entire time, who will be joining us here in the future, John Finnegan. Unfortunately, John's got some family issues, so he's not able to join us right now, but we're looking forward to having him in the future. And the journey of this podcast will be just that. We'll be taking you from the TWA, which was the foundation of ECW, and taking you all the way through the end of ECW with a lot of different stops along the way. Some names you know, and a lot of names you might have never heard of. So some interesting stuff here, but we're going to start with the basics and figure out, Jim, how did you first find out about professional wrestling? What's your earliest memory of pro wrestling?
My earliest memory is really Saturday, any given Saturday afternoon when I was a kid. My dad worked hard during the week. He was a hardworking house painter, but his weekend thing was motorcycles. And he amateur raced motorcycles, enduro racing, which was basically go through the woods and make your own path. And so they had teams that did this and went all over. He just stayed on kind of in the East Coast area. But on, when he wasn't racing, he was out in the garage tinkering. But at 11 o'clock or noon or whatever time it was on a Saturday afternoon when the WWF was on, Dad came in, sat down and watched it. Then he would go back out to tinkering on the motorcycle. But they're the first things I remember for wrestling is, sitting there with my dad watching them. And like I said, it was the WWF here in the South Jersey area and the Delaware Valley. So, we saw Tito Santana, Dean Ho, Bruno, all the names that you would associate with Vince Sr. promotion.
And Joel, how did you come across this beautiful, beautiful sport of ours?
Somebody I saw on TV. For whatever reason, it captured my interest. My father used to take me to the matches at the arena. My father was never a sports fan, but he happened to like wrestling for some reason. And I went, and it was unbelievable. And I saw Bruno Sammartino wrestle George the Animal Steele. And Spiros Arion was the guy that really got me going. And so I got to see these guys on television. And one thing just led to the other. And we can do a whole podcast on how I got started in the business in its entirety. But the reality was you got to see it on television. What's missing today in the sport is everything is so much showbiz that when you went to the Philadelphia Arena, or if you watched it with your father on Saturday morning, it was ropes that were in red, white, and blue. It was, they were done in Hamburg, Pennsylvania, in the hot, smelly building. You went to the Philadelphia Arena, and it was wrestling. It was wrestling. It was just great. And I used to tell people back in the day, professional sports to go today to a baseball game costs you a couple $100 when it's all between the parking and the food, et cetera, et cetera. When you go to a wrestling match today, it's the same thing. Back in the day, it wasn't. Back in the day, it was blue collar. People didn't spend a whole lot of money. Tickets were $1, $2, and $3 back at the arena. But getting back to the gist of this, my father got me interested in it by watching it on television. Then I got hooked. And once you get hooked on this thing, it takes you wherever you want it to go.
And to that same vein, who do you both credit for dragging you into this beautiful, beautiful sport of ours?
That's
good,
a great
Joel.
question.
Go.
No, go ahead.
A coworker that at the time I was working at RCA in Camden, New Jersey, and a coworker and I just started, hey, do you watch wrestling? And we back and forth, and we ended up actually going to a match, and it was the first time I'd ever gone to a match. My dad never had taken me, and I had actually have a family at the time, and so I got into the business late. I was 28, but this guy Joe Peary If we didn't go to the Great American Bash in 1987, I wouldn't have gotten into the business. So Joe went to the matches with me. That's where I saw Joel doing the ring announcing and talking about the fan club, got into the fan club, and it just blew up from there.
It was downhill from there.
As opposed to blossoming, it blew up.
And Joel, how about you? Who got you into the business?
Well, see, it depends on how far back you go. Okay, now this goes back. I'm in the financial services industry, been doing that now for 47 years. But back in the day, I had a client of mine. I won't mention his name, but he was a CPA in Huntington Valley. And one day he called me up. He says, "I have somebody I need you to go see. They want to talk about some insurance, some investments, whatever." So he gave me the phone number to Paul and Carmela Panfil. And one thing led to the other. I went to meet these people. As they turned out, great people. We sat in their house. They talked. They were talking about needed some life insurance. They wanted to do this, dot some I's, cross some T's. When we were all said and done, Paul says to me on the side, he says, "Do you ever, need tickets for anything?" I do tickets on the side. He wasn't a ticket scalper, but he could get tickets, whatever you need, as long as you want to pay the price. So I said, "Great, I'll keep you in mind." Well, then the next time I met with Paul and Carmela, he says to me, "By the way, what are you doing Saturday night?" I said, "Why? What do you got in mind?" He says, I have front row seats to the tickets to the Philadelphia Civic Center for wrestling. You want to go?" I said, "Oh my God, I haven't been to a match in a long time. This sounds like a great idea." So, if you really want to credit it, it goes back to the accountant who introduced me to Paul and Carmela. And Paul and Carmela and our history, we can go over that, but there's a ton of history there. And Paul got me to go to the first matches. And I remember one of the first matches was the Rock and Roll Express against the Road Warriors. And we were sitting on the front row. And all I remember is animals spitting on me and sweating on me. It was flying. And this was not the stuff you saw on television. Okay, and that's one thing that led me to the other, getting involved with those guys. But it all goes back to the accountant who introduced me to Paul and Carmel.
So now that we know who to blame for both of you guys, who gave you the best advice in your earliest years once you got inside the business?
Oh my God, that's a good one. Wow, I'll tell you, it ran for me. I don't know if I want to mention his name. Let's just say I was at one of the NWA shows at the Civic Center, and I was on the front row, like Paul always got tickets for the front row. And there was a guy walking around the ring wearing a suit. And I thought to myself, he's somebody I really ought to get to say hello to. I don't know why. Okay. So I went up to him. I was at the ringside. I went up to him and said, "Excuse me, I'm not sure who you are, but something tells me you're somebody I'd like to know." Well, he tells me who he is, and he says, "What are you doing after the matches?" I said, "I'm going home." He says, "No, you're not. You're going to meet me at the Marriott." And everybody goes back to the Marriott. The boys go back to the Marriott. Everybody in the show goes back to the Marriott. We party like crazy. We'll go back to the Marriott, and we'll sit and have a drink. Well, I don't drink. But I said, "Okay." So, I'll get a Diet Coke. Well, anyway, I went back to the Marriott, which was a scene unto itself. You have
to that's a show on its own.
Oh my God. You have to picture, I'll say 200 to 300 people for sure, standing there waiting for everybody to come in. Of course, they're trying to get autographs, they're trying to get pictures, they're trying to hook up with some of the guys, the whole 9 yards. And I'm sitting in the bar with this. Well, I'll give you Elliot Mernick was his name, and Elliot winds up being the eyes and ears of Crockett Promotions up here in the north. So I wound up talking to the guy who's responsible for booking the shows at the Civic Center, signed the contract, booking the shows, promoting the shows, et cetera, et cetera. And so Elliot was very responsible, because the rest of the history is obviously I wound up with Carmela doing a show for Crockett Promotions. Carmela and I actually went down to Crockett Promotions in North Carolina to meet with them. And one thing led to the other, really got me established with the guys, with the boys. And so I'll tell you, Elliot Mernick really got me involved in the business. Okay, my father got me involved in watching it. Paul and Carmela got me involved in going to the shows. Elliot Murray got me involved in the business.
And Jim, who about you? Who gave you your best advice in the early
It was
years?
actually at one of Joel's luncheons. He had the Koloffs in for the luncheon, and Sal Corrente was with him. Sal
Yep.
Corrente always traveled with the Koloffs,
Yep.
and I approached Sal and I said, "Hey, I'm interested in becoming a referee. Can you give me any advice?" And he said, "Yeah, don't do it." And someone tells me don't do it, yeah, I'm probably going to do it. So it depending on your perspective, it seemed to have worked out.
Now, for you guys who've both, done some things in wrestling, if you had any advice for people who are just getting involved or just getting started, what would you tell them?
Don't do it.
I knew that was such an easy setup.
First of all, I would tell you, make sure you have a lot of money. I was trying to do it on a shoestring. I got to be fairly substantial in terms of the shows that we were doing, but quite frankly, it was costing me a fortune to get it done. My hindsight, I know I overpaid guys, but the one thing I learned was those matches you still talk about 30 years later. But you need to be, think about this. Ted Turner had $70 billion and sold out. Okay. So it takes a lot of money to make a professional wrestling organization work. So as long as you got the money, it's a lot of fun. On the other hand, if you don't have the money, you got some issues, my opinion.
How about you, Jim?
I want to take a different perspective because I'm coming from someone that was in the ring as opposed to promoting. I would make sure that you have the support of your family, some financial support that always helps. But yeah, make sure everybody's kind of on board with it, because if you're going to get into a business where you might be on the road for a few days a week, you got to make sure that your spouse or your partner or whoever is on board with it. And when I didn't think I was going to be in that situation when I started, I thought it was just a weekend thing every once in a while, or maybe every weekend, but it turned into be more than that. And at the end of ECW, I was leaving on Tuesday morning and coming home Sunday afternoon. And it takes quite a toll on a relationship. And thank God we're still together through all that. But yeah, I would make sure everybody's on board with your decision.
Now, in any business, there's always that person you're competing with. That you show up to a job site and that person's there, and it's like that pretty much everywhere. And I would imagine it's like that in pro wrestling. So, did you have any direct competition in your early career where you felt like there was somebody always just beating you to the punch or attempting to do that?
No, I didn't. I always felt comfortable wherever I was. I shouldn't say always felt comfortable. I felt fairly comfortable everywhere I worked. I was a little uncomfortable at first when Eddie Gilbert came in and started booking ECW. I was afraid that, well, he's going to bring all his Memphis people in, and we're all going to be gone, and it's going to be a different picture. But knock wood, I was able to stick around for that. But a funny story that if John was here, he'd share it with us. When we were doing ECW for the WWF, or WWE, I should say, there was a referee who was there because we were taping with SmackDown people at the same time. So we do ECW and then SmackDown. And one referee seemed very paranoid that ECW referees were there. And we weren't under contract. We weren't offered contracts, the whole bit. We were just there on a nightly thing. And John and I are very good at reading people. And we realized that this guy was nervous as all hell that we were there. And we would go out of our way to say, hey, it's great to be here. So thanks for having us. We're having a great time. This is a blast. Anything we can do to help you out, make things better, we're just asked. We're happy to help you. And you just, see them wilting away.
How about you, Joel? Did you have any, or feel like you had any competition when you either On the promotion side, or even the radio show. I don't know that there was anybody doing, the radio show
Yeah, well,
like you were.
John Arezzi was doing radio up in New York, and of course, nobody heard my show versus his show. Back then, you didn't trade cassette tapes and what have you.
Right.
So John Arezzi was trying to do something very similar to what I was doing in New York. In terms of actual competition, I'll get cocky and say I had no competition. Dennis Caraluzzo was running shows in Jersey, but he tended to run local shows, what I call spot shows, smaller shows. And, he might have had one major name on it just to kind of sell some tickets. And his shows were fine. I used to go to Dennis's show. Every once in a while, he had me ring announce for him. And he would come to my show. If you look at my videotapes that are on YouTube, you see Dennis sitting ringside for me. So, I mean, we went to each other's shows, and he was tied in with Larry Sharp in the Monster Factory. We started Ringmasters Wrestling School, which never competed with Monster Factory. So, no, I think the one nice thing about the old territories and the old what happened in Philadelphia, they didn't know what happened in Woodbury, New Jersey. Okay, so you could do a show in Woodbury, New Jersey, and they never even went to Philadelphia to go see a show. So, and I just picked Woodbury as a town. But Dennis used to run these spot shows in Jersey. Jim Kettner was running spot shows in Delaware, and Dennis and I worked together at times. I never met to this day. Never met Jim Kettner. And so he was running shows in Delaware. We were running shows in Philadelphia and the surrounding areas. And we'd occasionally run a show in Jersey, and occasionally run a show in Delaware. One time we ran a show in Maryland. But we were never competing against them. And quite frankly, the type of business that we were doing was more hardcore. Dennis was doing more family-oriented shows. And again, it had its place. And I would actually argue that Dennis and his whole promotion made more money than my promotion did. So if your goal was to make more money, Dennis's way worked. Dennis and Larry Sharp. But anyway, so getting back to this, there was no competition, and you could run a show, and that was the hot topic. Obviously, with the radio, there was nobody else with a radio show on professional wrestling. Down here in the Philadelphia area, occasionally on WIP, other than my show, Howard Eskin would bring up wrestling. In fact, one time Howard Eskin had Ric Flair into Ribbit for a radio show. And so you have others that were on the radio that did occasional, but nobody competed with me on the radio show. That was my TV, to be honest. And in terms of promotions, I was, nationally, I was the largest independent promoter in the country. Now, you could argue Herb Abrams was larger because he was theoretically an independent organization, although he created the UWF and had TV, etc. But when it came time to booking talent, I had nobody competing against my guys because nobody competed against what I paid. Okay, and I was able to draw some guys into Philadelphia that nobody ever expected. I can tell you story after story after story. I mean, the Iron Sheik just passed away the other day, and Iron Sheik did 3 shows for me one time. He stayed in my apartment for 2 weeks, and the man ate nothing but grapefruit. I swear to God, that's all he ate was grapefruit. Okay, and I loved him to death. He was just a great guy. But anyway, get back. There was no competition. I did my thing, and they did their thing, and we all made money or lost money.
The only competition was actually in the minds of the fans. They were the ones who believed there was a competition.
Yeah.
So when you guys both first got involved in wrestling, what did you consider to be your big break when you could kind of say, all right, I think I'm going somewhere with this?
Well, for me, it was Dominic DeNucci. Carmella and Paul were partners at that time when we opened up the Squared Circle. We decided to have a grand opening, and Carmella was very close with Bruno Sammartino. So we got Bruno and Dominic to be at our grand opening, and they did autographs, the typical thing.
And for those who don't know, what was the Squared Circle?
Oh, okay. Squared Circle was a retail store. Back in the day when Hulk Hogan finally was starting to make it, we decided, it wasn't such a good move, but we decided we were going to open up a store called the Squared Circle where we would sell all the wrestling merchandise. But we went one step further. We sold the tapes from Japan and from Memphis. We started getting in equipment. We started getting in stuff from all these various promotions, and which is another way that we got to get know the people from the Pacific Northwest, got to know people from World Class, got to know people from Georgia, Florida, etc. Because we were buying stuff. So anyway, it was a retail store. It was a place called the I-95 Marketplace, which was only open on the weekends, I think Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And needless to say, I had my own professional career. Carmel at the time was a full-time mom. Paul had his business. So the fact that we were working the weekends, this is what Jim talks about, making sure the family's involved. Here, I had two sons at the time. I was getting divorced, but I had two sons. I wanted to have them for the weekend. Well, I would take them for the weekend, and I would take them to the wrestling store. Okay, which is fine and dandy, except the kids wanted to get the hell out of there. But then when I started taking them to the matches, then they just thoroughly enjoyed that. And the best part was when I ran my shows, everybody knew that they were my kids. So of course they all went up to them for pictures, they all went to autographs, they all took photos with them. So it was a lot of fun. But you need the family involved. I'll reiterate what Jim said. Family's got to be involved.
For me, when I felt that I really made it was a few of Joel's shows. When I started working with talent that was beyond the TWA roster. So, like working, the first match I think this was before the other one, but there are two that I'm thinking of. Cactus Jack against David Sammartino, because they were doing a feud on Herb Abrams' show at the time, and Joel would bring them in for matches. And the other one that I can think of was a Chichester High. Remember, there was a Chichester High, and it was Crush against Billy Jack Haynes.
Now,
and I was like, wow.
I flew both of those guys in to Chichester, Delaware County, and nobody knew who the hell they were.
Right, but it got a lot of magazine coverage because I still have the picture, I still have the article, and I was like, wow, now I feel that I can work with big name people, and it makes me feel comfortable, and that's what, as a referee, and I guess as a wrestler too, you need to feel a fair amount of comfort in the ring.
Sure.
Yeah, especially if you're out there in your underwear. So can we backtrack a second? And Joel, can you maybe explain to everybody who's not familiar how TWA got started, what the original idea was, and then maybe Jim, you could follow up with how you got involved after Joel's done.
Well, I'll tell you, this goes back again. I mentioned Dominic DiNucci. When Dominic came into our grand opening, one thing he had pulled me and Carmella aside, and I can't do his accent, but he basically said, "Do you guys ever think about promoting a show?" Well, I had never given it any thought. Carmella, I can tell you, at least never gave it a thought with me. She might have thought about it years before. Anyway, one thing leads to the other, and Dominic, we get to do a show at the Chamonix High School, and we able to get the room, we get the gym, we had to go get the insurance. So you find out all of a sudden what has to be done to put on a show. We put on a wrestling card and we promoted it at the store and on our radio show with Wrestling Radio. We can talk about that separately, but the kicker was we did a show. The main event was Dominic DiNucci against Mighty Igor. Okay, you're talking about two aged guys. They thought that they had a name. By the time they came on with me, they didn't sell any tickets. But on that show, Dominic brought one of his trainees, Shane Douglas. Okay, didn't bring Cactus in, but he brought Shane Douglas. So Shane worked for me before he was Shane Douglas. Anyway, we did a show. We drew about 125, if I remember, 130 people, something like that. And I think we wound up losing $1,000, whatever it was. But it's like, Jim will tell you, once you get the bug, you get the bug. So that show led to another show, which led to another show. Eventually, I wound up doing a show for Crockett at the King of Prussia at the Sharpen Valley Forge. And I just remember when they did a promotion on TV for that show, Jim Cornette came on and he said, who's this King of Prussia? I'll never forget. I got to get a copy of that. And then, so one thing led to the other. I did a show at the Sherman Valley Forge for Crockett. They got flogged in North Carolina. That's another story into itself. Eventually, then Elliot Murnick came to me and said, let's do a show for Crockett there. So wait a minute. Let me go back. The first show we did at the Sherman Valley Forge, my main event, picture this one, was Abdul the Butcher versus Bruiser Brody.
Jesus.
Okay, and now I'm promoting this thing.
That's an independent show, by the way, for anybody listening out there.
Okay, and they destroyed $2,300 worth of tables because I got a bill from the Sherman Valley Forge. Okay, And it was funny because in the back they said to me, "What do you want?" I said, "I want Bruiser Brody against Abdullah Butcher. The magazines are here." Now, one of the things that Jim Molyneux mentioned this to you because he just kind of alluded to it, because we were in Philadelphia. We live in the area where George Napolitano lives. We live in the area where Bill Apter's still in the area. Okay, all the New York magazines came down. Smith came down, and everybody came. So whenever I brought people to the show, they were able to get photos that they couldn't get anywhere else. When I brought, I had Adrian Street against Jimmy Valiant. Adrian Street never came north of the Mason-Dixon line. Okay, but I had a reputation. Anyway, getting back to all this, so the one card led to another, which led to the other, and I got into the feeding frenzy. My shows were like all stars. I mixed the TWA talent with the major names. The major names, the word got out that Goodhart pays, his checks clear, and that was a big. That's another story into itself. That I'm actually doing a book, which if I ever get around to finishing it, it'll be a miracle. But one of the stories in there is how Bruno Sammartino got me started in the dressing room of my first show at Temple University. Anyway, I'm babbling on. I keep going on diversions here. Here's all I can tell you is it's a great story. We could be on here for a week.
And Jim, how did you end up getting involved?
Well, I was a member of the Squared Circle fan club and went to the luncheons and all that kind of stuff. And
it was my fault.
It is. I wouldn't speak too loudly. My wife's in the next room. Your name's next to the name of Heyman. and when you say that name in this house, it's like saying Frau Broker in Young Frankenstein.
Well, anytime you want to talk about Paul Heyman stories, I got him before he was Paul Heyman.
But I was a member of the fan club, and Joel got to the point where he entrusted me enough to pick people up at the hotel or the airport or whatever and bring them to the luncheons. So we became very friendly. I wasn't just a member of the fan club. And I started some independent stuff with a real small company, not even worth mentioning, as a manager. I was extravagant Jimmy Fortune and came to the ring, wore a satin suit jacket with some sequins on it, and I carried a briefcase, and I managed Jimmy Giannetti a couple of times, and Dynamite Dennis Allen once at a show. And so I went to Joel, and Joel was already running TWA. And so this is end of 89. And so I gave Joel a call and I said, "Hey, I'd really like to see if you could use me as a manager." And well, don't really need a manager. I have Donnie Allen, and I have you had Woman, you had Nancy in, you had Luna Vachon, so you really didn't need a manager. So, but I could use another referee, and sold me on the school and how much it would cost, and I'll tell you what, this is one thing that Joel said that I don't think really too many other people ever told their prospective students. You will make in a year what you paid for the school. And that kind of stuck with me. And he said, think about it for a week and give me a call back. So hung up the phone, thought about it, called him back 10 minutes later and said, "I'll see you Tuesday night at the school." And I took money from a 401k and paid him. And I did make that money back in a year, or a year from the first matches I did. Because I think I only trained for like 8 weeks. And I did my first show. The first show was at Westchester at the community center. There were 2 other shows that weekend, but they were both in New Jersey, and I couldn't work because I didn't have the licensing stuff yet.
Do you remember who the main event was?
Well, there were 2 main events because you had and they switched off, so I don't know exactly which one was which, but you had Ivan Koloff, Manny Fernandez, Bigelow.
No.
Wahoo.
You had Wahoo McDaniel against Manny Fernandez.
Okay.
And that was a chop fest beyond unbelievable.
But someone else was in that weekend too, I think, because you switched them around because it was Jersey shows were Burlington Technical
Yeah,
high
it
school,
could
and
be,
Trenton,
could be.
the
The
CYO in Trenton.
the Trenton CYO show, all I remember was it was blood everywhere. Okay, and in New Jersey, it's hard to do. And oh my God, I remember the 3 shows in 3 nights. And Manny Fernandez and Wahoo specifically earned their keep more than you'll ever know. Okay, more than you'll ever know.
But yeah, that was the first that's what got me going.
No, we're gonna go over individual episodes of TWA. Well, we call them episodes, but they're shows, and we'll break down specific shows over the course of this podcast. But do either of you guys have a particular show that jumps out in your mind as one of your favorites?
Yeah, for me, it was the show that drew the least number of people, and that's when I had a 2 out of 3 falls match with Eddie Gilbert and Cactus Jack, and we had the 2 out of 3 falls match during the course of the whole show. So we had one match which was a pins count anywhere in the building match. Then the second one was a stretcher match, and the third one was a steel cage match. Okay, and those guys, and the Cactus will tell you this to this day. Obviously, Eddie Gilbert passed away, but I paid them as if they did 3 matches. Okay, so it was the biggest payday. I mean, Cactus still talks. It was his biggest payday as an independent wrestler because he actually got paid for 3 shows. Okay, Eddie Gilbert had done TV in the past where they did 3 or 4 matches, but Cactus still tell you to this day. So that showed to me, but it only drew about 800 people at the Philadelphia Civic Center. It was in the summer, and it was a summer sizzler. And we just, for whatever reason, people didn't want to come out.
But you say 800, but 800's a huge number for an independent show nowadays.
Yeah, Brian's salivating. 800 people.
But keep in mind, I spent a lot of money to get people there. I had 3,200 people one time. So when you get 800 people, it's a downer. It's a downer. But anyway,
how about you, Jim?
That was my match.
The show that really sticks out to me is Pine Hill Punishment. Again, blame Joel, but he trusted me to drive someone around that weekend, and it was Buddy Rogers. And Buddy stayed at the Cherry Hill Holiday Inn because he wanted to be close to family, because family came over and visited him instead of going into the city. So I got to drive Buddy Rogers for a whole weekend, and it was great. And I made the mistake of not picking his brain because I don't want to seem like that green guy who wants to, do all that. You didn't do that back then. There were a lot of things that are different now that people do behind the scenes that you didn't do before. You didn't take pictures in the locker room with each other and things like that. And they're all over the internet now. But being able to drive Buddy around for that weekend was great. Buddy was in as the guest referee, but he came in early and did the radio show in the morning. And wherever we went, people knew Buddy Rogers, even though he didn't live in the area anymore. Everyone knew Buddy and called him champ. And I ate for free that weekend because wherever we went, they knew him and they paid for his meal.
Hey, Jim, do you remember who he was the guest referee for?
Yeah, it was JT. It was Bam Bam and Steve Williams.
Yep, Bam Bam and Dr. Death. You got it.
Right. But he got involved with JT Smith and Buddy Landell, which was leading to him against Buddy Landell that never happened. And I think that should be a show on its own. The show that never happened. That there's another match that I still salivate that could have happened that on that show that I would have loved to have been a part of.
Which one?
The tag team match that you advertised.
Williams
and Gordy against Furnace and LaFon. Oh,
it's amazing the fact that I was able to pull that. With that match, that one match was going to cost me an absolute fortune. Furnace and they were coming from Europe, so they were coming in for the show. Then I had 4 flights, et cetera, and if that show ever came off, that would have been the match that made the card. Now, Buddy Randell against Buddy Rogers would have been what a depressed guy. Okay,
That's the draw.
The tag match would have been unbelievable.
And I think what Jim is saying is a great point. We got to do that maybe on our next episode. We'll talk about what could have been on that particular show.
Oh my God.
But
That
to your
that tag match, well, not we should save it for the show, but I'm going to say it anyway. That tag match would have been what sold videotapes around the world.
Yeah.
The videotape traders.
Yep. And
and
I'll go one better. I was working. It never was going to happen, as it turned out, and I never promoted it this way. I was working on having a guest appearance during the Buddy Rogers Buddy Landell match.
don't tell us. Don't tell us right now.
Okay.
Save it for next one.
Next week, find out.
See that? I learned that in film school, boys. So what Jim was saying is a very real point. I mean, even when I got into professional wrestling in 2002, a big thing that was beaten into the heads of everybody is you don't take pictures. You don't take pictures of even rookie and rookie. You don't take pictures backstage. It's something you don't do. And all these years later, do you guys regret not having some of those photos? Or is it just kind of, that's how the business was?
I regret it. I have no photos. You can't find a picture of me with any of my, because in my mind, they were working for me. Okay. And I think back to the day, would I've loved to take, there's no question. There's absolutely no question. I would have loved to have pictures taken with all of them. It just, back in those days, you just didn't do it. But what's interesting, you mentioned pictures. Keep in mind, Paulie Dangerously, Paul Heyman was a photographer. Jim Crockett was a photographer. A lot of the guys that have got involved in the sport were photographers first. Okay, but taking the pictures of no. I to this day, I'm glad I didn't do it because I kept my role. But in hindsight, I would have, now that the world has changed, I'd take those photos in a second.
Yeah, I would too, just for the mere fact that a lot of them that were friends aren't here anymore. The one that I really do have that I cherish is the last night Sherry Martel was in ECW, and she pulled me over with someone that had a camera and said, "Here, let's get a picture." And I still have that picture with Sherry Martel the last night she was in ECW. But there are a lot of, all the guys that you can think of that were in ECW. I wish I had pictures with them because they were my friends.
Yep.
And even myself, like I'll find stuff in magazines and I'll send them to Joel because I know that he just doesn't have those photos, and a lot of them are out in front of the camera. They're not those behind the scenes kind of candid photos. So anybody who's in wrestling right now, I would just urge, and it kind of became a big thing when Jay Briscoe passed away, that everybody would just take the photos if you have the opportunity. Because wrestling is such a fleeting time to begin with. Enjoy every minute you're in it, I guess, is the moral of the story. So at the end of the TWA, I have a bug flying around my microphone, and it is driving me nuts.
Well, you know what draws flies, don't you?
I'm talking too much.
A pile of shit draws flies. Just remember that.
So when you got to the end of the TWA, Joel, what was that like for you personally? And same question for you, Jim.
Well, it destroyed me. I'll tell you, when I got out in 1992, it was January 18th of 1992, when I went on the radio and told everybody, "See you later." I was done. My daughter was born February 5th, 2 weeks later. So I had to make a decision. I knew that I was going to lose big time on this card that I was promoting. That was going to be the top card of ever and ever and ever. And I just wasn't selling tickets to the point where I could cover the cost. So when I got out, I really went out of the way to disappear. And I literally disappeared so that when I went off the radio, my phone number was disconnected. Nobody could find me that wanted to find me. Larry Winters, who was my booker, couldn't find me. Anyway, I cut off my phone number. It disappeared. The state came over, took over my bond to give everybody their ticket money back. So everybody that applied got their ticket money back. Nobody's ever said that they didn't. And I disappeared for 17 years. And literally, I did not go to an ECW show, didn't watch it on television, didn't watch WWF at the time. I didn't even watch NWA Crockett stuff on TV. Didn't watch any of that stuff until I got a phone call from this guy by the name of Mike Tartaglia, or goes by the name of Mike Bruno. And he was starting up the TWA again. And he called me up. He found me in my office. So it took 17 years. literally 17 years. And when he called me up, he asked me, he wants to run a show in South Jersey. Can he use the TWA title? Well, I said to him, what am I going to do? I didn't use it for 17 years. Got to go use it. I didn't know that he was going to go and then kill it. Okay. So he created the TWA, and he was merging it with the ECWA, and the TWA belt was buried. The ECWA took off. He bought Mike Kettner out, and one thing led to, but I 17 years I disappeared. So I'll tell you, yes, it affected me.
I remember that morning rolling over, turning on the radio, and laying in bed and hearing that the show was canceled, and that was it. I was like, oh no. So I actually called Joel's number and left him a message. I think you could still leave a message. And I said, I have these stack of tickets. What do I need to do with them? And funny things, I probably should have held on to them. They'd, be like a collector's item now. But like not too long after that, I got the call that, hey, from whoever it was, John or maybe Bob Artis, hang on, we're trying to put something together. We're keeping you involved. Just hold on. So that's what I did, and I held on, and still holding on for.
Joel, do you have any regrets about closing up in '92? Do you think if you just had weathered the storm, or went ahead with the show, or changed the show around, do you regret those 17 years of not being involved in wrestling, or is it something you just can't even fathom?
No, I mean, I don't. I regret it and don't regret it at the same time. On the one hand, I love the idea that the TWA really started the Attitude Era, okay, which created ECW, which went to Vince and what have you. I love the idea that some of the guys that started with us, like Sandman, who started our Ringmasters Wrestling School, Glenn McIntyre, Glenn Osborne, guys. Jimmy Janetti was another one Jim mentioned before. They all started Ringmasters Wrestling School. So we started something. The snowball was created. ECW obviously took what I was doing way to a level I never even imagined. I knew, based on your question, I knew that I was at a point where either I found somebody who had millions of dollars, because if we didn't get onto TV, the radio had done its 4.5 years of the radio. It did its course. I needed TV. I couldn't get to TV. I was trying to talk with a couple of local stations in Philly, and it was clear it was going to take money to do it. I had brought one of the shows that we did, Bar Wars, down at the Philadelphia Sports Bar. I had conversations with a couple of the guys. Cactus was on the card, Buddy Landell was on the card, and I had told all these guys, especially the guys that became the Eddie Gilberts, the Cactus Jacks, the guys that were on I told them, every time I have a show, you're on it. I'll give you the date. It's yours, unless you tell me you can't make it. All right. And that's how Cactus was on almost every show I had. Scott Bam Bam Bigelow was on virtually every, because he was local. Okay. He wound being on every show I got. Anyway, it's weird. The 17 years that I didn't watch, I didn't miss it. Now, in hindsight, I missed it. So it's a quandary. I would have loved to have been there during some of those ECW shows, because I watched it now, and you see some of the videos and what these guys did. They took what I was doing to another level. Okay, some people said that I started it. I started it, but they finished it. Oh my God. Okay, and I watched some of that stuff, and yeah, it would have been nice to have been there. I would be nice. And this is my fault. I don't get, and when I say I mean we, the TWA doesn't get the credit that it deserves. Okay. And one of the reasons I'm writing this book, if I ever get around to finishing it, is because the TWA started everything. I took the best of Memphis. I took the best of Pacific Northwest. I took the best of World Class. I brought them all into Philadelphia, and it created something. It created a buzz in the industry that I still think is going on today. Anyway.
Jim, would you say it's fair to say that that TWA created the Philly style that would eventually become ECW?
Oh, absolutely. I think before TWA, there was no Philly style. The Philly style was the TV tapings at the Philadelphia Arena, the WWF, and that that was done in Philly, but it was also done in other parts of the country. So it wasn't a specific Philly thing. Um, TWA came around, and like Joel said, the couple shows in Delaware, one show in Maryland, Pennsylvania, New Jersey. We were right in the Delaware Valley. We shouldn't say a Philly show, but it was a Delaware Valley thing because people did cross the bridge to come to the arena for shows. They crossed the River Styx either way, whether you were going from Philly to South Jersey or South Jersey to Philly. People were crossing the bridge to see some of these shows, and some of the matches that he said from the Pacific Northwest and Texas and Memphis and all the territories that you read about in the magazines. Wow, now I get to see it live. Wow, I'm going to see Jerry the King Lawler against Austin Idol live. Wow, I only get to read about it.
So right now, what do both of you guys have going on? Be it outside of wrestling or involved in wrestling, just as we're kind of closing up here. What are both of you involved in right now? And Joel, I know we were talking about some of the stuff before we began. I don't know if that's something you want to talk about.
No,
While we're recording.
I'm not involved in wrestling anymore, other than occasionally showing up at one of these things. I got the Lifetime Achievement Award from ECWA a year or so ago, and I got to go to get my plaque, and I really appreciated that. And before that, I was Blackheart. So I did my own little stuff on the wrestling side, but I've gotten involved in promotions of cover bands, and we do about, give or take, 30 shows a year in the area: Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Jersey, Delaware, Keswick Theater, the Maryland Theater, the Kirby Theater up in Scranton, the Pittman Theater, etc. So we do shows in the area. And I have a production company called Friendly Heart. So I always tell people that I'm tripolar. So I'm Good Heart when it comes to financial services. I'm Friendly Heart when it comes to concerts, and I'm Black Heart when it comes to wrestling. So there you go. I'm three people in one. So, but my financial services company is based in Plymouth Meeting, and we manage a lot of money for a lot of people. Fortunately, I got out of the wrestling, so I was able to manage money now, and it works. But anyway, long story short, keep him busy. I'll be 70 years old this year. I've had some health issues, but I'm working hard, and I'm spending this Tuesday night right before a Phillies game to be on a podcast. So that tells you what kind of life I'm leading. Hey Jim, how about you?
Well, unfortunately, I'm still involved in wrestling. I'm one of the guys who can't get it out of his blood. When ECW shut down, I didn't have a lot of roads for refereeing, so I actually went to the Monster Factory that was still up and running. They still are at the time, and helped them promote their shows and do some of the help with some of the training. So while I was there, guys like John Tolan, who was one of the dicks in on SmackDown, Sheamus, Damian Priest, QT Marshall, guys like that came through the Monster Factory. So I'm proud that I was able to help guys get to their goals. But things happen in the business, and you split off in different directions. And so we created my old business partner at the time. We created OTW, Old Time Wrestling. We wanted to do family-oriented shows, and we were still training guys too. And we ran shows until just before the pandemic. I actually, he moved back to Canada, and I was running on my own, and I had some health issues myself, and said, it's a long day. I'm not going to do this anymore. So luckily the lovely people at the ECWA bought my ring, and
yeah, that's right, we did.
and I was invited to come and referee. And I was like, I haven't refereed for a long time, but sure, let me give it a try. And the selling point was I was able to work with John Finnegan. So I showed up, and I'm back refereeing whenever possible, anyone's interested in giving me a call and using me. But I've been doing some signings and things like that too. So keeping my hand in it.
Never get out.
No.
Never get out. Once they get you. Well, everybody, I just want to thank everybody for joining us here, especially you guys. This has been fun for me. If you're somebody who's interested in the history of professional wrestling, specifically on the independent level, because I don't know that stuff like this has ever been covered, especially in the detail that we're going to go into. I think this is an exciting time, and it's exciting that we have a platform like this where we can do something like this. And basically what we're saying is you're going to see this little company, TWA, that evolves into something called Eastern Championship Wrestling, which will later become ECW. And it's going to be quite a ride. So if you're not subscribed already, please do so. And we look forward to seeing you right here next week on Before It Was Extreme.